Today I'm going to be talking about Bushmills Irish Whiskey, which is the oldest licensed whiskey distillery in the world. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian Donnelly. I'm an expert in distilled spirits with 9 years experience in the alcoholic beverage industry, and my goal is to educate consumers more about the alcoholic beverages they enjoy so they can make better shopping and drinking decisions. This is definitely a brand that maybe isn't as popular as some of the other big brands in the category, such as Jameson from Pernod Ricard or Tullamore Dew from William Grant, but I think the brand offers a lot of value for the money, perhaps because it is a bit underrated. The brand is now owned by Mexican-based Proximo Spirits, which is the parent company for big tequila brands such as Jose Cuervo and 1800, along with many, many more. I'm going to be speaking specifically for the American market because I'm based here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but I feel like Bushmills is a brand that perhaps has a negative reputation or a negative connotation to it, because there's so much competition in the Irish whiskey category from the major brands, which, Bushmills is definitely a major brand, but it's definitely a distant third compared to Jameson and Tullamore Dew. And then there's this whole boom in craft Irish whiskey. I mean, you have all these different brands, some from small boutique suppliers, some from big suppliers. So there's a lot of competition, and I feel like Bushmills is this really important brand that offers a lot of value for the money, but perhaps kind of gets discounted or overlooked. So that's the reason I wanted to make this video. I previously made a video where I covered a brief history of the Bushmills brand and then kind of explained the difference between all the different products. And the feedback I got on that was, when are you going to taste them? When are you going to taste them? When are you going to taste them? So thanks to all the great feedback, I learned that the tasting component of these videos is arguably more important than the brand information. In this video, I'm going to taste through 4 products from the Bushmills portfolio. That's the Bushmills Original, which is the white label, the Bushmills Black, the Bushmills 10-year Irish Single Malt, and the Bushmills 12-year Irish Single Malt. I think these 4 products offer a nice price range and a good diversity of styles. If you've not seen my original video, I'll just touch on a couple talking points about Bushmills. As I mentioned earlier, Bushmills is the world's oldest licensed whiskey distillery. The brand can trace back its license to distill. King James granted the original license to distill on April 20th, 1608. When you talk about Irish whiskey, it can refer to whiskey that is distilled in Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, or the Republic of Ireland. So Bushmills is a brand from Northern Ireland. The distillery is located in the town of Bushmills, which draws its name from the River Bush and the mills that the river originally powered to process the grain, which was then made into whiskey. I think it helps to get a little technical or a little nerdy in order to explain the nuances within Irish whiskey. So especially when consumers, especially American consumers, think about Irish whiskey, they just think about Jameson, which is a blended Irish whiskey. And blended Irish whiskey definitely makes up the majority of the volume within the Irish whiskey category. But you have these other types of Irish whiskey that are important. And then when you start talking about blends and what makes up the components of those blends, it's important to understand all these different kind of subcategories of Irish whiskey. As I mentioned, the majority of Irish whiskey is going to be blended Irish whiskey. So, like when I talk about Bushmills White Label, the original Bushmills, or if I happen to be talking about Jameson or Tullamore Dew, these are going to be blended Irish whiskey. So let's define that real quick. So in order to understand blended Irish whiskey, I'm going to talk about a couple of the subcategories of Irish whiskey, and then that will help kind of clarify what different components can go into a blend or a blended Irish whiskey. So the first I'm going to focus on is Irish malt whiskey. This is important for the Bushmills brand specifically, although plenty of other brands make a Irish malt whiskey. So this whiskey is produced from a mash bill of 100% malted barley. This type of whiskey is traditionally triple distilled, although sometimes it's double distilled in copper pot stills to encourage complex flavors and a full oily texture. This is relevant for the Bushmills brand because the backbone of the Bushmills flavor profile is their single malt Irish whiskey. There's a high proportion of single malt Irish whiskey in their blends. It could be argued that the Bushmills brand is defined by their single malt portfolio. And so again, this is Irish single malt whiskey, not Scotch single malt whiskey, or now even American single malt whiskey. So again, that is whiskey that is distilled from just malted barley at one single distillery, single malt. And then because we're talking about Irish single malt whiskey, that's whiskey distilled in Ireland, Bushmills has whiskey that is a blend, which contains a high proportion of single malt whiskey compared to other competitive options in that category, as well as an extensive single malt Irish whiskey portfolio, which we'll talk about with the 10-year age statement and the 12-year age statement single malt Irish whiskeys. The next subcategory is Irish grain whiskey. So that's whiskey produced from a mash bill containing 30% malted barley. The remainder is comprised of other cereal grains such as corn, wheat, or barley. This type of whiskey is continuously distilled using column stills to achieve a lighter style and is usually blended with malt whiskey or pot still whiskey. All right, the next and perhaps most defining style of Irish whiskey is Irish pot still whiskey. This style is produced from a mash bill containing a minimum of 30% unmalted barley and 30% malted barley. The remainder of the mash bill may be malted or unmalted barley and may include up to 5% other unmalted cereal grains, which is usually oats or rye. This type of whiskey must be distilled in pot stills and is traditionally triple distilled. So when you talk about pot still Irish whiskey, the reason this is such a signature aspect of Irish whiskey, when Ireland was under the control of the British Crown, the Crown imposed a tax on whiskey distilled from malted barley in order to raise tax revenue from whiskey distillers who were distilling from malted barley. They imposed a tax on malted barley. So Irish whiskey makers, in order to defy the British Crown, they started distilling from unmalted barley in order to kind of skirt that tax, and in doing so created something that was distinctly Irish. It's important to understand that, you know, there's a broad spectrum on Irish whiskey. I would say any of the brands that are distilled at the Middleton Distillery, which is Jameson, Powers, Redbreast, Spot, and the Middleton brand, are going to be defined by this kind of pot still style. And then, you know, Bushmills is going to be defined by that single malt style. And I always say Tullamore kind of falls somewhere in between. So, you know, speaking for the American palate seems to really like that pot still flavor profile. And again, you get a portion of that with Jameson. And then, of course, from Middleton, you have single pot still Irish whiskey like Redbreast and Spot. And perhaps here in the United States, that single malt Irish whiskey flavor profile that you really get with Bushmills is not quite as popular. And when consumers think about pot still Irish whiskey, they often think that just means the whiskey is distilled in a giant pot still. And I can see why that's really confusing, because you don't often talk about mash bills when it comes to old world styles of whiskey. You're talking about American whiskey such as bourbon, rye, Tennessee whiskey. You're always talking about the mash bill, that proportion of grains that is, you know, milled, fermented, and distilled. But it's important to kind of keep that same framework when talking about the mash bill of pot still Irish whiskey and how it, you know, differentiates itself from these other different styles, particularly single malt. And that brings us to the final and most important category, at least important in terms of volume, and that's blended Irish whiskey. So blended Irish whiskey is produced from a mixture of 2 or more whiskey types, which I just previously mentioned. The whiskeys that make up the blend may also be chosen from different distilleries, ages, types of cask finishes, and flavor profiles to achieve the desired flavor and consistency. Blended Irish whiskeys tend to be smooth and mellow with a range of flavors and a light, silky mouthfeel. Blended Irish whiskey is the largest and most popular category. Again, I already mentioned that. And again, just to point out, anytime you see the word single, that denotes a single distillery. In the United States, we tend to think of everything through the lens of bourbon. Bourbon is usually always distilled at one single distillery, but in countries like Ireland and particularly in Scotland, there is a tradition of sourcing and sharing whiskey distilled at multiple different distilleries and blending it together. And so maybe I'll talk about that in a future video, but it helps to denote if you see single malt, whether it's Scotch or whether it's Irish or single pot still when it comes to Irish whiskey, that single denotes a single distillery. Bushmills single malt whiskeys are distilled just at Bushmills, and, you know, Redbreast, for example, their single pot still Irish whiskeys are distilled just at the Middleton Distillery. All right, let's talk about the individual products themselves. So the first product I'm going to talk about is Bushmills Original, or I usually call it the Bushmills White Label. And one particular thing to call out is Bushmills is unique for its square bottle. I mean, if you look at the other Irish whiskeys in the space, Jameson has a round bottle, Tully has that kind of flat pancake bottle, and then Bushmills has this very iconic square bottle. And the reason for that comes from originally the bottle design was square so that you could more easily pack more bottles into a case and it would be more efficient when shipping overseas. And then here's the kind of newer, more updated label, which I think looks super clean. And then you have, see if this shows up on camera, this beautiful embossing on either side with that iconic 1608. They're very proud of that. All right, what is Bushmills White Label and how is it different from the other products? So Bushmills Original is a blend of 45% single malt Irish whiskey using only malted barley sourced from Ireland and 55% grain whiskey distilled from corn, which is often referred to as maize. Next, the whiskey is aged for a minimum of 3 years with an average age of 4 years in a combination of former Kentucky bourbon barrels, which are sourced from the Kelvin Cooperage in Kentucky, and Spanish Oloroso sherry cask before being bottled at 80 proof or 40% ABV. All right, let's try it. So, the color is described as pale gold, which I feel like is a very accurate description. And I'm going to go through the official tasting notes from the brand. So the aroma is described as light, fruity, and spicy. Vanilla note developing into vanilla ice cream and creme brulee. That's quite a description. I feel like that has a really nice, just kind of classic Irish whiskey nose. Really enjoyable. Nothing crazy, but again, this is an entry-level Irish whiskey, so it's to be expected. But I feel like the light, fruity, and spicy is a really accurate description on this one. And then the flavor is described as gently warming, mouth-coating texture and a touch of honey sweetness. All right, let's see how it tastes. This is the first sip of spirits that I've had today, so my mouth definitely needs to, kind of get acclimated. But that first sip, definitely not too boozy and not too kind of harsh and grainy. I would say very smooth, very drinkable, relatively light. No sort of, crazy complexity. The most defining feature of blended Irish whiskey at this price point is kind of drinkability, mixability, and smoothness. This is a product that's meant to be versatile. It's meant to be easy to drink and enjoyable. And I would definitely describe the first sip of this as light, smooth, tasty, and enjoyable. Now, let's revisit it. So, gently warming, good descriptor there. I don't know if it's quite mouth coating, like it's not heavy on the palate, it's really light. But touch of sweetness, it's probably from that little bit of sherry aging that they use. But that's really nice. I mean, there's just good classic flavor there. It's smooth, it's drinkable, it's not offensive. It's not offensive on the palate. It's not grainy and harsh. This is really nice. And, the finish is described as crisp, fresh finish with a hint of spice. I think that's super accurate. Crisp and fresh. And, it doesn't fatigue the palate, and it kind of leaves you ready for that next sip, which I think is super important for a product at this price point. So, one other thing I want to note is the official cocktail recommendation for the white label is an Irish coffee. When you start mixing kind of entry-level Irish whiskey, because it is really light, it tends to get lost. And so, the most simple cocktail is always an Irish whiskey and ginger ale. I think that is super refreshing. You can use whatever citrus you want, lime, a lemon. It's really, really enjoyable, especially in the summer. Irish whiskey and lemonade is really enjoyable together. And then, of course, you can't beat an Irish coffee. So I love Irish coffee, and I think this would be a perfect option for an Irish coffee. And then the most important question, is this product worth the money? I'm going to be quoting pricing for a 750 milliliter bottle, but Bushmills Original is available in a bunch of different sizes, and so I'm just going to be quoting $750 pricing on all these just to keep it simple. And again, I live here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so I'm going to be quoting average retail price in my market, but every single market's different, so please check your local liquor store for pricing. In my market, this product can retail somewhere between $28 and $30. So, do I think this is worth $28 to $30? I definitely do. This product is probably going to fall a couple dollars under Jameson, and I think you get really drinkable classic Irish whiskey flavors. And so I think this product is definitely worth the money. And if you've never had Bushmills Original and you're looking for an Irish whiskey at this style, this price point, I do not think you'll be disappointed. All right, the next product is Bushmills Black. So, very similar packaging, just with a black label. Same kind of iconic square-shaped bottle. You can see it's got that same embossing. I mean, just even on camera, you can see the difference in color on this one. Oh yeah. Here's the back. And Bushmills Original has a screw top, but this has one of the half cork pop tops. So, here's Bushmills Black. Now, the question I most often get, what's the difference in Bushmills Original or Bushmills White Label and the Bushmills Black Label? So Bushmills Black is a blend of 80% Irish single malt whiskey and 20% grain whiskey. It's aged for 8 years in a combination of 20% Kentucky bourbon barrels. Again, those Kentucky bourbon barrels are going to be sourced from the Kelvin Cooperage. And 80% Spanish Oloroso sherry casks, and finally bottled at 80 proof or 40% ABV. So this is the first jump in quality from Bushmills Original. You know, you see that with the higher proportion of Irish single malt whiskey in the blend. You see that with a higher proportion of sherry cask aging and that older age statement. If the average aging on Bushmills White Label is 4 years, you know, this is jumping up to 8. So, you know, huge jump in quality. And you can see that huge jump in quality in how it's produced. One easy way to remember the different production facts around Bushmills Black. So that's the rules of eights. That's 80% single malt in the blend, 80% sherry cask aging, and aged for 8 years. I know I'm about to taste this product here on camera, but I've been drinking Bushmills Black for many years. I think it is one of the most underrated bang for your buck values in all of Irish whiskey. I mean, the quality, like the complexity you get with this product for the price offered is incredible. And I'm gonna talk through. I'm gonna taste it here on camera. I'm gonna talk through the official tasting notes provided by the brand, and we're gonna discuss the pricing. But I mean, this product is a real sleeper pick, and I'm really excited to try it here again on camera because I haven't revisited this product in a while. All right, so the color is described as a russet gold. And you can definitely, you know, I don't know if this shows up on camera, but you could definitely see a jump in color going from the white label to the black. Again, double the time spent in barrel, higher proportion of former sherry cask barrels used. So it should be no surprise that that color is going to be so much darker, so much richer. So this is described as russet gold. I don't quite know what russet gold is, but I feel like it's probably this. So maybe a good descriptor. The aroma is described as big, full, rich fruitcake, intense sherry sweetness, developing into dried fruit, raisin, and Christmas cake notes. Now that is an aroma description. Oh yeah. I feel like the sherry influence really kind of jumps out of the glass on this. I feel like if you put this in front of someone blind, they wouldn't immediately know this is Irish whiskey. This is really fascinating. It's got a really nice nose though. All right, so the flavor profile is described as soft, silky texture with a nutty character. All right, pretty straightforward. Oh yeah. Wow. Big difference. Big difference on the palate compared to the white to the black. Soft, silky texture. Oh, that's very accurate description. There's this kind of like fleshy, dark fruit character to this. I mean, I think that sherry influence is really noticeable, but it's really well integrated. This doesn't feel like some sort of, you know, some of the Speyside and Highland single malt scotches that are aged in, you know, a ton of sherry. I mean, they're just these sherry bombs. This, I feel like the sherry is a good supporting element, and it's definitely the backbone of this, but it doesn't overwhelm it. It's really nice. Here, let me revisit this. Oh yeah, it really coats your whole mouth. That's got a really, really really enjoyable kind of full palate flavor. Um, let's see, the finish is described as lingering sweetness, remarkable balance between the power from sherry seasoned cask and the smoothness of the spirit. Very accurate. This is super smooth, super drinkable, very enjoyable. The enjoyable part is often gets lost when people do these reviews and they start getting into these weird nuances. Is this 3.5 stars? Is this 4 stars? Whatever metric you use. For me, is this enjoyable to drink, and is it worth the money that you paid for it in retail? And so the question on this is this enjoyable to drink? Oh, without a doubt. This is really, really nice. There's so much complexity here. And the fact that this is still like a blended Irish whiskey, now it's got a ton of, single malt. It's got a ton of that sherry influence. It's been aged 8 years. This is really, really enjoyable. It's interesting because the cocktail recommendation for this is a Bushmills Black Old Fashioned. And normally I would never make a old fashioned with Irish whiskey. It would just get lost. It wouldn't be that interesting. But I feel like it's got enough barrel flavor to it, and it's robust enough. Even though it's only at 80 proof, I feel like this could hold up into being mixed into a variety of kind of whiskey forward classic cocktails. I think this would make a great old fashioned. I think it'd make a great Manhattan as well. I love Manhattans. I'm a Manhattan guy compared to, given the choice between old fashioned and Manhattan, I'm a Manhattan guy. But I think this would make a fantastic old fashioned, fantastic Manhattan. And this is really, really enjoyable and really, really tasty. And it's remarkable to see that kind of jump in flavors and complexity compared going from the white label to the black label. That brings us to the most important question at all. Is this product worth the money? Well, you can probably guess from, the way I've described this, my thoughts on it. But in my market, the Bushmills Black, a 750 of the Bushmills Black retails somewhere between $37 and $41. So call it a $40, maybe even sub $40 bottle. In my opinion, this is definitely worth it. I think you're getting so much value for the money here. The fact that this is potentially $10 under 50 and you're getting an 8-year-old Irish whiskey with this proportion of sherry and this kind of interesting, complex, soft, silky, enjoyable whiskey. I think this is a no-brainer. This is no questions asked, worth the money. And in my opinion, I've had the Bushmills 10-year before. I've had the 12-year before. We're about to try them on camera, and I'm going to talk through them. But when it comes to, what is the best bang for your buck option from the Bushmills brand, where are you getting the most whiskey for your dollar? I'm going to stake a guess right now as I taste through all 4 of these that it's probably the Bushmills Black. So as you can see, I'm a huge fan, and it's a product that I feel like not enough people know about. Thank you so much again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe even learned something. Please give it a like and consider subscribing. If you do not care about the video component of this material, please consider checking out my podcast. It's just the audio of the content that I produce on these videos. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, any major podcast platform. I highly recommend it to check it out or share it with your friends if you do not care about the video component here on YouTube. If you'd like to be notified whenever I have new content on my website, on my podcast, on my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to my email newsletter. I personally read every single email, and I really try to respond to all of them that I can. So please consider subscribing to my email newsletter. It's a great way to communicate with me. I love receiving feedback from people. Shoot me an email if you have recommendations for the channel, recommendations for products that I should review, or particular spirit categories that I should talk about. If you'd like to support this channel further, please consider becoming a Patreon member or gift me a cocktail to the link below in the description. Thank you so much again for your support. Once again, thank you so much again for watching, and as always, please drink responsibly. Cheers.